My single female coworker stole my house keys. Then, my security app caught her inside my home with my husband. Used to believe that workplace identity theft was limited to someone stealing your lunch from the communal fridge or taking credit for your quarterly slideshow presentation. I never imagined it could escalate into a calculated infiltration of my actual life. My husband David and I had been married for 2 years. Our relationship was steady, built on a foundation of quiet, unshakable trust. We lived in a modest suburban home with a wraparound porch, and our routines were predictable. David ran a local youth center, and I worked as a senior speech therapist at a private clinic downtown. Then, our clinic hired Chloe. Chloe was 26, single, and sharp. On her first day as a junior therapist, the clinic director assigned her to shadow me so she could learn our patient logging system. I welcomed her with open arms. I showed her my filing methods, gave her my template packages, and even let her sit in on my private consultations. But within 3 weeks, her professional admiration mutated into an uncomfortable hyperfixation. It started with small things. I wore an emerald green blazer to work on a Tuesday. On Thursday, Chloe showed up wearing the exact same shade and fabric blend. I started bringing iced matcha lattes to the office. Within 48 hours, she had abandoned her regular black coffee and was drinking the exact same brand, using the same reusable bamboo straw. Wow, Chloe, looking in a mirror today, our office receptionist joked one morning when we both walked into the break room wearing identical tortoiseshell glasses. I offered a polite, forced chuckle, but a cold prickle of discomfort tightened my neck. I had been wearing those specific frames for 3 years. Chloe had purchased hers the previous afternoon. The tipping point occurred during our mid-month clinical evaluation meeting. I was sitting at the conference table typing notes on my tablet when I noticed Chloe staring intently at my left wrist. I was wearing a vintage rose gold mechanical watch, a deeply personal heirloom my father had given me before he passed away. It had a highly distinctive scuffed leather strap with an asymmetrical brass buckle. "That's a beautiful watch, Sarah," Chloe murmured, her voice entirely flat as she tilted her head. "It looks so timeless. Where did you get it?" "Oh, thank you," I said, covering the watch face instinctively with my other hand. "It was my dad's. It's an old custom piece, so they don't really make them anymore." Chloe didn't look away. She simply nodded slowly, her pupils dilated as she made a note on her pad. The very next Monday, Chloe walked into the staff room, adjusted her left sleeve, and deliberately set her coffee cup down right next to mine. Resting on her wrist was a near-flawless replica of my father's heirloom watch. She had tracked down the exact vintage brand online, sourced an identical weathered leather strap, and even scuffed the metal casing near the crown to match the natural wear on mine. "Do you like it?" she asked, her voice dropping into a quiet, breathy cadence that sounded eerily similar to my own vocal inflections. "I thought it looked so elegant on you. I just had to find one for myself. It feels like we're twins now, Sarah." My blood ran cold. It wasn't a coincidence, and it wasn't flattery. It was a systematic, deliberate erasure of my individuality. The psychological escalation crossed into physical territory on a Thursday afternoon. I had left my desk for 10 minutes to run a speech diagnostic template down to the printing room. I left my heavy leather purse sitting on the hook behind my office door, my house keys, a heavy brass ring containing my front door key, the key to David's youth center, and a small silver tag with our address engraved on it were sitting in the exterior pouch of the bag. When I returned to my desk, Chloe was standing near my filing cabinet holding a stack of patient charts. "Just dropped these off for you, Sarah," she said, offering a wide, vacant smile before turning on her heel and walking out. I didn't think anything of it until that evening when I arrived home. I reached into my purse to pull out my keys, but my fingers met empty leather. I emptied the entire bag onto the porch steps. The brass ring was entirely gone. "David, I think I dropped my keys at the clinic today," I told my husband as he opened the front door for me, his brow furrowing with concern. "Can we use your spare set to lock up tonight? I'll check the lost and found repository tomorrow morning." "Of course, honey," David said, kissing my forehead and taking my coat. "Don't stress. They'll probably turn up on your desk." But they didn't turn up on my desk. The next morning, I searched every square inch of my office, the printing room, and the break room. When I asked Chloe if she had seen a heavy brass ring, she looked me directly in the eye, adjusted her replica rose gold watch, and shook her head with a look of perfect, innocent sympathy. "Oh no, Sarah, that's terrible," she sighed, her voice mirroring my exact worried tone. "Your house keys? That feels so unsafe. You should definitely be more careful with your personal belongings." I stood in the hallway, staring at her as she walked away. A dark predatory instinct in my gut told me that my keys weren't lost under a desk or dropped in a parking lot. They were sitting in the bottom of Chloe's bag. She hadn't just copied my style. She had taken the physical instrument required to access my sanctuary, and she was waiting for the perfect moment to unlock the door. Over the weekend, the atmospheric tension inside my own mind became suffocating. I couldn't shake the image of Chloe holding my brass keyring, sliding it into her pocket while I was down in the printing room. I didn't tell David about my specific suspicions regarding Chloe. He was a deeply practical, trusting man who ran an open-door community center. And I didn't want to sound like a paranoid, unhinged wife spinning conspiracy theories about a junior coworker, but I wasn't going to leave my home unprotected. On Saturday morning, while David was out at the youth center organizing a weekend charity basketball tournament, I drove to a local home improvement store. I purchased a high-definition smart security hub system that included 2 motion-activated doorbell cameras and a sleek, discrete indoor security lens disguised as a minimalist digital desk clock. I mounted the clock camera on the high mantle in our living room, angling the wide-angle lens to perfectly capture the front entryway, the main hallway, and the kitchen island. I linked the live feed to an encrypted application on my phone, enabling real-time push notifications, cloud storage archiving, and two-way audio streaming. Just a little extra security for the house since I lost my keys, I casually told David that evening when he noticed the new digital clock on the mantle. Smart move. Sarah, he nodded, setting his clipboard down on the counter. With the wedding season coming up and us being out of the house so much, it's good to have an extra eye on the place. The trap was set, but I hoped against hope that I was just being crazy. I hoped that my keys would eventually show up in a crevice of my car seat, and that Chloe was just a lonely girl with an identity crisis. The algorithm broke that hope on Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in my private office at the clinic around 2:15 p.m., reviewing a speech articulation report for a 7-year-old patient. Chloe had logged out of the clinic layout an hour prior, claiming she had an emergency dental appointment across town and needed a half-day leave. Suddenly, the phone resting next to my keyboard vibrated with a sharp, double-pulse notification. The screen read, "Alert, motion detected in living room zone." My heart stopped. David wasn't supposed to be home until at least 6:00 p.m. He had a regional youth board director meeting in the city all afternoon. I opened the security application, my thumb trembling against the glass as the live data stream buffered. The high-definition feed cut through the screen, showing the bright, sunlit interior of my living room. The front door was open. Standing in the center of my entryway, holding a designer tote bag that was a direct replica of my own daily work bag, was Chloe. She was wearing a tailored beige trench coat, the exact coat I had left hanging in my office closet that morning. She stood perfectly still for a moment, looking around the living room with a slow, chilling expression of ownership. Then, she reached into her pocket and placed my heavy brass keyring onto the entryway console table, right next to our family photo frame, as if she lived there. "What are you doing in my house?" I whispered to the empty office, my breath catching in my throat as a wave of pure, visceral terror washed over me. Before I could hit the two-way microphone button to scream at her through the speaker, the audio feed from the camera picked up the distinct sound of a car engine cutting off in the driveway outside. Chloe didn't look panicked. Instead, a slow, calculated smile spread across her face. She rapidly shed her trench coat, tossing it onto our sofa, and walked into the kitchen. She opened our refrigerator, pulled out a bottle of white wine that David and I had been saving for our anniversary, and smoothly poured 2 glasses. A few seconds later, the front door opened again, and David walked in, carrying a stack of youth center flyers. He stopped dead in his tracks as he saw the wine glasses on the counter and Chloe standing in his kitchen, wearing a dress that looked identical to my favorite weekend wardrobe. "Chloe?" David's voice came through my phone speaker, his tone filled with absolute, unmitigated confusion. What? What are you doing here? Where's Sarah? How did you get into the house?" Chloe didn't flinch. She picked up the 2 wine glasses, walked gracefully toward my husband, and offered him that same sweet, vacant smile that had haunted me for weeks. "Hi, David," she murmured, her voice carrying that exact, mimicking cadence she had stolen from me. "Sarah asked me to come over and drop off some important clinic documents for her. She told me the spare key was under the mat, and she said we should celebrate your big promotion while we waited for her to get off work." I sat at my desk, my jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached, watching my husband's face turn into a mask of pure discomfort as Chloe stepped directly into his personal space, holding out a glass of our wine. The calculated malice of her plan was undeniable. She had stolen my keys, tracked my husband's schedule, and was actively trying to manipulate her way into his life by staging an intimate encounter inside our own home. I held my finger over the screen, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My survival instinct told me to call the police immediately, but I forced myself to watch the live stream for another 30 seconds. I needed to see how David handled the intrusion. If he gave in to her manipulation, my world was over. But if he stood his ground, I had the ultimate legal weapon to destroy her career and her presence in our lives forever. On the screen, David took a step backward, completely ignoring the wine glass Chloe was pressing toward his hand. His face hardened, his eyes narrowing with a sharp, protective intensity. "Chloe, put the glass down," David said, his voice dropping into a firm, authoritative register he usually reserved for breaking up fights at the youth center. "Sarah would never tell anyone to use a spare key without calling me first, and she certainly wouldn't tell you to open our private wine. You need to leave this house right now." "David, don't be like that," Chloe whispered, stepping forward again, her hand reaching out to touch the sleeve of his sweater. Her eyes had a glassy, desperate look on the high-definition monitor. "Sarah doesn't appreciate what she has? She doesn't see how incredible you are. Look at us. We fit perfectly in this house. I can be exactly what you need." "Get your hands off me!" David snapped, twisting his shoulder away from her grip with a look of profound disgust. He walked straight to the entryway, opened the front door wide, and pointed toward the driveway. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing at Sarah's clinic, but you are trespassing in my home. If you aren't out of this doorway in 10 seconds, I am calling the county sheriff." Chloe's smile vanished, her face twisting into a cold, venomous expression that looked completely demonic on the camera feed. She realized the manipulation had failed. She snatched her tote bag from the kitchen island, stomped to the entryway, and grabbed her trench coat from the sofa. "You're making a huge mistake." "David," she hissed, looking back at him from the threshold. "Sarah isn't as perfect as you think she is. You'll see." She slammed the door behind her. David instantly locked the deadbolt, leaned his forehead against the wooden frame of the door, and let out a long, ragged breath. He pulled pulled his phone from his pocket, and a fraction of a second later, my own phone began to ring. I hit the answer button immediately. "David, I saw everything." "Sarah, what is going on?" David's voice was shaking with a mixture of anger and confusion. "That girl from your office, Chloe, she was inside our house. She had a key, Sarah. She didn't find it under the mat. She let herself in." "I know, David," I said, my voice completely cold, steady, and focused. "She stole my brass key ring from my purse last week. She's been systematically copying my clothes, my watch, and my life for a month. She thought she could slide into my place while I was stuck at work. We're going to the police right now," David said. "No, not yet," I told him, looking out my office window at the clinic parking lot, where Chloe's compact car was just pulling back into her designated spot. She had driven back from my house like a ghost returning to the scene of a crime. "The police will just treat this as a minor trespassing incident or a workplace dispute because she left before you called them. I want her gone permanently." Tomorrow night is the clinic's annual Charity Gala Portfolio dinner. Every major board director, our regional HR head, and the clinic owners will be in the ballroom. I'm going to make sure they see her true profile. The next evening, the grand ballroom of the Grand Vista Hotel was spectacular. The room was illuminated by massive crystal chandeliers, the long tables decorated with silver satin runners, white orchids, and sparkling champagne buckets. More than 80 senior therapists, medical board directors, and regional corporate executives were laughing and celebrating a record-breaking financial year for our clinic network. David stood to my right, looking incredibly handsome in a tailored black suit, his hand resting securely around my waist as we chatted with our regional director, Dr. Aris, and sitting at the table directly across the dance floor, wearing an elegant emerald green evening gown that was an exact, stitch-for-stitch replica of the dress I had ordered online 3 weeks prior for this exact event, was Chloe. She was sitting next to her department supervisor, holding a champagne flute, her hair styled in the exact same asymmetrical chignon loop as mine. When she looked across the room and saw me wearing the same gown, her eyes glinted with a terrifying, triumphant spark of superiority. She thought she had won the psychological war. She thought she had successfully stolen my identity. At 8:30 p.m., the clinic director stepped to the podium, tapping his microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we introduce our keynote speakers for the evening, we have a special digital presentation celebrating our senior staff's community milestones, put together by our senior speech pathology department." The room applauded warmly as the house lights dimmed to a dramatic 5% twilight. On cue, the massive 30-foot digital projection screen behind the stage hissed to life, cutting through the dark with a bright beam of white light. The first few slides showed standard, professional achievements, our clinic teams working with children, local charity drives, and staff anniversaries. Then, the transition slide hit, and the ballroom's master audio system emitted a sharp, digital chime. The screen didn't show a patient profile. It flashed with a giant, high-definition title card, a case study in workplace ethics, the Chloe Vance Portfolio. The room went instantly, suffocatingly quiet. Before anyone could call the tech booth to stop the feed, the audio system blasted Chloe's own voice across the ballroom, recorded clearly by the clock camera just 24 hours prior. "Sarah doesn't appreciate what she has. Look at us. We fit perfectly in this house. I can be exactly what you need." The television screen displayed the crystal clear night vision and daylight video loops from my living room mantle. The entire corporate board watched in absolute, paralyzed horror as Chloe was shown unlocking my front door with my stolen brass keys, pouring my private wine, shedding her coat, and cornering my husband inside our private home while wearing my stolen wardrobe style. A collective, massive gasp rippled through the rows of tables. I looked across the dance floor. Chloe's face went from an arrogant, self-satisfied smirk to a horrific, translucent ash gray color in less than 2 seconds. Her champagne glass slipped from her hand, shattering loudly against the parquet floor, a sharp musical crash that echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. What is the meaning of this? Dr. Aris breathed from our table, his face turning an angry, dark shade of crimson as he stood up, glaring directly at the horror displayed on the screen. Is that Miss Vance inside a senior staff member's private residence?" The video advanced to the final slide, a high-resolution scan of the police report David and I had filed that morning for grand. Larceny of private property, the keys and the heirloom watch validation, and criminal home infiltration. "Chloe," the clinic director's voice boomed across the microphone, entirely devoid of its previous warmth, "you will leave this ballroom immediately. HR security is waiting for you in the lobby. Your license to practice clinical therapy in this state is under immediate permanent suspension pending criminal prosecution." The eviction of Chloe Vance from the Grand Vista Hotel lobby was handled with the swift, unblinking efficiency of a corporate execution. She didn't try to deliver a speech. She didn't try to scream that the video was a digital deepfake. 2 private hotel security guards escorted her by her elbows through the double glass doors into the cold night rain, where a local police cruiser was already waiting by the valet line to process the formal trespassing warrant David and I had signed that afternoon. But when David and I returned home that night, the victory didn't feel triumphant. It felt heavy. The house felt violated, as if a toxic mist had settled over our furniture and our rooms. "I don't want that lock on the door for a single second longer." "Sarah," David said, his jaw tight as he stood in the entryway, looking at the brass keyring Chloe had left on the console table. "I already called the locksmith, David," I said, setting my purse down. "He'll be here in 20 minutes. We spent the midnight hours running a complete physical audit of our home security. The local locksmith didn't just change the tumblers. He installed a heavy-duty, commercial-grade digital deadbolt system that required a dynamic, rotating biometric thumbprint scan and an encrypted rolling code link to our phones. The old brass keyring, the physical tool Chloe had used to breach our sanctuary, was thrown directly into a metal lockbox to be turned over to the county prosecutor as primary evidence for the larceny trial. The next morning, I returned to the clinic to clear out the professional residue of her presence. The director had already cleared Chloe's desk, packing her items into a standard cardboard box that sat by the reception counter like a pile of abandoned waste. I walked into my private office and opened my filing cabinet. As I reviewed the patient logs Chloe had handled during her shadowing period, I noticed a final, chilling detail. In her shared digital folders, Chloe had saved a hidden document titled Sarah's Schedule Master. It contained a meticulous, minute-by-minute breakdown of my daily routines: what time I went to the break room, what route I drove to work, the specific gym class I attended on Wednesday evenings, and even David's youth center calendar links. She hadn't just been copying my style. She had been building a tactical blueprint to map her way into my life, waiting for the exact moment when she could step into the empty spaces I left behind. I downloaded the schedule file, added it to the digital folder I was maintaining for the state licensing board, and wiped her profile permanently from the clinic's local server. When I hit the final confirmation key, watching her user profile disappear from the staff directory with a simple digital click, I felt the first real breath of clean air enter my lungs since the day she had purchased her identical tortoiseshell glasses. The identity she had tried to build by stealing mine was completely erased from the professional world. 6 months passed, like a necessary clearing of a forest fire. The legal and professional consequences for Chloe Vance were absolute and unskippable. Because of the ironclad, high-definition clock camera footage and the data logs from the stolen schedule files, the state board permanently revoked her speech therapy credentials, ensuring she would never be allowed to work in a clinical or private care capacity with families again. The court handed her a 2-year probation sentence for misdemeanor larceny and felony trespassing, along with an ironclad, permanent restraining order that legally restricted her from coming within 500 yards of my office, our home, or David's youth center. She vanished from our local community, moving back to her hometown 3 states away, her reputation completely toxic to any professional network or social circle in our district. Today was a crisp, bright Saturday afternoon in May. The sun was streaming through the large bay windows of our living room, flooding the hardwood floors with warm, golden light. The scent of fresh coffee and cedar oil filled the air. I stood by the mantle, looking down at my left wrist. I was wearing my father's vintage rose gold mechanical watch, the real one, with its unique scuffs and natural leatherware. It didn't look like a replica anymore. It looked exactly like what it was, a beautiful, unshakable link to my family's history. David walked into the living room, wearing a casual pair of jeans and a dark wool sweater. He had just come back from a successful weekend tournament at the youth center. He looked healthy, relaxed, and his eyes carried that deep, quiet certainty that had always been the anchor of our marriage. He walked up behind me, wrapping his strong arms around my waist, resting his chin gently against my shoulder as we looked out the window at the green leaves of the oak trees in our front yard. "I talked to the clinic director this morning," David murmured, his voice warm and steady against my neck. "He told me the new junior hire started today. A young guy named Marcus. He said Marcus is doing an incredible job, keeps to himself, and actually uses his own templates." I laughed, a genuine, thick ripple of relief rising in my throat as I leaned back into his chest. "That's a welcome change, David. I think I'm officially done with twins for the rest of my career." He smiled, kissing the side of my neck, his hands squeezing mine. "You're one of one, Sarah. There's no replica for the real thing." I looked down at the new biometric digital lock on our front door, then back at the simple, minimalist clock camera sitting on the mantle. For a long time, I thought that keeping the peace and ignoring the small warning signs was the right way to handle workplace discomfort. I had allowed myself to believe that imitation was just a weird form of flattery. But as I looked around our beautiful, clean living room, a space that belonged entirely, unshakably to us, I knew that the security app notification wasn't a crisis. It was a rescue mission. It had stripped away a predatory fraud, validated the absolute trust between my husband and me, and given us the ironclad boundaries we needed to protect our future. The copycat coworker had tried to write a script where she could steal a life she hadn't earned, but she forgot that when you try to live in someone else's house, the person who holds the real key isn't just the owner. They're the author of the story that comes next. And the life David and I were standing in now was absolutely, brilliantly our own.